Yeah, mostly have it functioning pretty well and got the hard stuff working, just doing some cleanup of edge case. But other than that, yeah. Now, look at this message. There's barely any punctuation because that's definitely how I text. And there is an S dropped off of edge cases. And when I was testing my model, I realized how much I misspell, and it's not because I can't spell, it's because I just type really fast and don't read what I'm saying. I trained a large language model locally on my 4090 to sound like me, because every time I've ever tried to get any sort of large language model, be it Claude, Gemini, I cannot get them to write like a human. They always write like artificial intelligence. And I see all the time that people want these agents to be their personal assistants and to respond to emails for them. And I'm like, if it's not making decisions how you would make them, and it's not writing the messages exactly like you would write them, who cares? It's not gonna work. I had an idea. I have a 4090, so I've got 24 gigs of VRAM on it, which means I can train models up to about 9 or 10 billion parameters. Because when you're training a LoRa layer, typically you wanna be loading all of your weights in FP16, not a quantized version of that. So because of that, I chose Qwen3.5, the 9 billion parameter model, because it's open source, it's open weight, it's easy to fine tune. I can run a LoRa training session with a batch size of 2 and only use 22 gigs of VRAM. My second constraint is that I am not sending any of my emails or messages to Anthropic, to ChatGPT. They're not leaving my house. So the other thing that I had to do was I had to be able to train the model locally, but I also wanted to be able to create my data set locally, meaning I wasn't going to use Claude or anything like that to look at all of my emails and texts and create the data set, because again, I'm not sending every single message I've ever written anywhere outside of my house and my servers. The first thing I had to do was get the data. Now, there's two places that all of my messages live. They're in iMessage and they're in my email. So I use Google Takeout to get all of my emails from a few of my business accounts and my personal email. Then I copied. Now, if you're going to do this or try to attempt this, be really careful about giving anything full disk access. I copied the chat.db database file out of iMessage into my working directory. And then I wrote a script to go through and ignore group chats and I ignored text with my wife, because I do not want to train a large language model on text with my wife, because the way I talk to my wife is very different than I talk in business or with colleagues or friends. And then the other thing I did was filter on certain words. I didn't want to train the large language model on my friend's profanity. I would never say bad words. Now you've got all of your texts and emails that you've sent in the context which you sent them, which is really important, because that's how we're actually going to train the model on what to say where. But you need to turn this into a data set. You can't just take all these messages and shove it into a large language model and expect it to know how to text like you. You need to create a training data set, pretty much just of inputs and outputs, but I can't just use the message before as my input, because I'm not training this model to make decisions as me or even decide what to say. That was actually a problem I had on my first training run, is I tried to have what I want to be quantized down, or what I want to be a 9 billion parameter model in 4-bit quant. I tried to have this be the thing that made the decisions about what to say by just handing it context and a goal of here's what you want to say. And I actually got pretty bad output because the model would get confused about what its goal was, because I'm using a really, really small large language model to try to both generate the message and make the decision of what to say and how to respond. So this new model's goal was to be given a message to say, who we're saying it to, the context, the channel, whether that's text or email, and all of the information about what we're trying to say and who we're saying it to. But my next iteration was the smarter model, like Opus or whatever is running the agent, decides what to say, decides the message. It says, oh, hey, here's how we're going to respond, because I wanted the smarter agent to be responsible for understanding everything and the decision making. But we needed to this model's job is to take that agent's message in the context of what we're trying to say it to and who we're saying it to, and rewrite it how I would in that setting. The goal of the new data set was to do that. We're going to train the model on the context, variations of how to say it, actually the goal, the message here that the agent would generate, and then train it on my actual output. So creating the data set, we had a handful of steps. Step number one was our filter step. So we first wanted to filter out our block list of messages. So anything, like I had a bunch of test emails in one of my email inboxes for an agent product we were working on. So I wanted to filter all those out because I didn't want to train this on those conversations. I filtered it out on group chats. I filtered it out on personal stuff. I wanted to cap our input messages at 2,000 because I only had about 400 or 500 emails that I could train this on, and I had about 14,000 text messages, and I didn't want to skew the agent's training so hard on SMS that that's all it knew how to do. So I wanted to cap it at 2,000. I used all of our emails, and then I just randomly selected texts out of different conversations. So that way also we weren't just training sequentially in one conversation, we would randomly sample. So we had about 500 emails that we're training on and maybe 1,500 text messages. And then we wanted to annotate everything. So this model could see all of the context from that conversation up until our message. It could not see our message, and its goal was to pretty much just summarize what the context of this conversation was up until this point. And then the next pass was a de-styler pass. So our goal for this model is to take the output of a typical large language model and translate that into what I would say. And so to do that, we took my message, and now this model only saw my message. It saw nothing else about the context or anything else. And I just had it generate 3 different variations of how it would say that. So we had a formal pass, we had an informal pass, and then a bulleted pass. So we're trying to take our messages and spread those out around how a large language model would say these. So that way we're working backwards from here's our target, and we're generating the large language model input, so that way we can say this input equals this output. Then we did a tone tagging pass, and this pass would only see my actual message and then tag it with different tones of like formal, informal, polite, professional, on 18 pre-selected. So it wasn't just making up tones, it could pick from these 18. And then we did a verification pass. So we just dropped draft messages that were too close to the target. So what the AI generated actually was really close to what my message output was. And we went ahead and dropped context that was leaking our target. And so that left us with 3,318 training inputs and 494 validation inputs that we could validate our model's output against as we did eval passes. My training settings were pretty simple. I'm just training LoRa layer, which is a low rank adaptation layer, onto Qwen. I did a batch size of 2 because I had a little bit of VRAM headroom that I could train it in, and I just ran it for 1 epoch, which is just run it through all of our training data once. And then the format that we are training the model on was generate a message in my exact style, which was the prompt for here's what you're gonna do. And then with the channel, which is text or email, the subject of the email, the recipient, their name, our relationship, the setting of this conversation, the context. Setting was just business or personal. Context is like the conversation, what's happening. The message is the actual message that the large language model wanted to write, and then tone for the example for how the model wanted to output. Okay, so I've got a little chat window up here that I've been using to kind of test it and get it dialed in. So here, GPT-5.5 is gonna be our agent that's actually making the decisions and generating the output. And so it's going to generate its messages in a very AI manner. It would be Jake, a close friend and constant contact. This is personal. And then I've got some voice parameters here that I can tweak as we go. I'm going to text myself as someone else. Hey, did you get your project done? Yeah, mostly have it functioning pretty well and got the hard stuff working, just doing some cleanup of edge case. But other than that, yeah. Now, look at this message. There's barely any punctuation because that's definitely how I text. And there is an S dropped off of edge cases. And when I was testing my model, I realized how much I misspell. And it's not because I can't spell, it's because I just type really fast and don't read what I'm saying. So that was insightful and introspective. Oh, sick. What edge cases are you dealing with? Now, this is just gonna make something up. Mostly odd SMS provider edge cases like carrier webhooks coming out of order, duplicate delivery receipts, numbers getting reassigned, failing opt-ins, people texting stop or start in weird ways, and making sure an agent can accidentally send a message that breaks compliance rules. That is how I would write that message. That is uncanny. Now, if we look at the draft here, I can see what GPT-5.5 tried to say. Mostly weird SMS provider stuff, period. And then I said, mostly odd SMS provider edge cases with just a line break. No period, no nothing. That's how I would text. Things like carrier webhooks arriving out of order, duplicate delivery receipts, numbers getting reassigned, failed opt-ins, blah, 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 making sure it's blah, blah. The message here didn't change a ton, but it's definitely more informal. Failed opt-ins, failed opt-ins. That's how I would type that. And so this is the input that the agent output. This message here passed through my large language model running on my 4090 right now and came back here. Now let's try email, because business email is really what I want this thing to be able to do. So we're gonna hit clear conversation. We're gonna change the channel to email. I'm going to be Jake. I'm gonna be Jake from State Farm. Cold contact. Tone, override, professional. Great. Yes, sir. WED works for me. Quite flexible even after like late morning Pacific time. If there's anything that would work for you, shoot it my way and we can make that happen. That is 100% how I would write that email. I tend to be very informal, even if I'm emailing Jake from State Farm about a meeting next week. But I think the benefit of this is it makes it feel human. It makes it feel like I'm interested. I'm not being hyper formal. It doesn't feel like an agent's writing this. Let's try another response. Awesome. Wednesday at 1 p Pacific works for me. See you then. And it's gonna confirm for me. Again, assuming that the agent would have confirmed with me or looked at my calendar, it's just gonna make something up. Perfect, Wednesday 1 p Pacific is the ticket. Looking forward to it. I don't know if I've ever said is the ticket, but granted that this was trained on thousands of my messages, maybe I've said something like that, or it's just making it up. Anyways, I am excited to get this working. I have a couple ideas of how I wanna test this in the real world. I don't think I can offer this as a service because you have to let me process every single email and text you've ever sent, and that is hyper invasive. And I think the first thing I'm gonna try to have this do is do some cold intro emails for me and see if I can get a higher response rate by being a human and writing emails the way that I would. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, let me know. Try out fine-tuning Qwen yourself on your own messages and let me know how it works.